Eleanor burst into the kitchen and froze. One of Vincent's men stood there, knife gleaming. "The boss said I could have some fun. Guess I'm starting early." She raised the Winchester, hands shaking. Pulled the trigger. Nothing. She'd forgotten the safety. He lunged. Some called her a schoolteacher, a gentle soul who taught mining children for free. But that night Eleanor Hartwell discovered something her Cherokee mother had always known. When survival is on the line, even the hunted can become the hunter. This is the story of the winter of 1878. October 15th, 1915, Montana. The fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the walls of the private library. Graham Blackwood sat in his leather chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. At 72 years old, his hair had turned completely white, but those steel-gray eyes remained as sharp as they had been 37 years ago. Across from him sat Samuel, his grandson. 16 years old, dark hair inherited from the Blackwood line, young face troubled by matters of the heart. "You're saying you won't marry her?" Graham's voice carried the rasp of time, but underneath lay something harder, something that had survived decades of winter storms. Samuel shifted in his seat. "Her family is poor, grandfather. Mother says it would be inappropriate, that I should consider someone of our standing." "Your mother says." Graham leaned back, a mirthless smile crossing his weathered face. "Tell me, boy, do you know what your grandmother did before she married me?" Samuel shook his head. "She was a teacher, in a town so small it barely had a name. Her father owed money to a saloon keeper, $5,000. In 1878, that could buy 3 houses. Graham poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the firelight. "The saloon keeper wanted payment, but not in gold." The boy's eyes widened. "I paid that debt, $5,000 in minted gold coins. The town thought I was buying her like property." Graham took a slow sip, his gaze distant now, looking past the walls of the library to somewhere else entirely. "But your grandmother, she saved me. And if you want to understand why this family still stands, why the Blackwood name means something beyond money, you need to hear the story of the winter of 1878. He set down his glass. Outside, the Montana wind howled, rattling the windows. It all began on December 18th. The room seemed to darken. Samuel leaned forward, drawn in despite himself, and Graham Blackwood began to speak. The cold cut like a knife. Eleanor Hartwell stood on the wooden platform outside the general store, her mother's yellowed lace dress hanging loose on her thin frame. The dress had been beautiful once, back when her mother wore it, back when Morning Star still walked the earth with grace and dignity. Now it was just another remnant of a better time. Her breath formed white clouds in the air. -8 degrees Celsius, though. Eleanor didn't need a thermometer to know the cold was brutal. She could feel it in her bones, in the way her fingers had gone numb despite being clasped together in front of her. Around her stood 40, maybe 50 men, miners mostly, farmers, a few drifters who'd wandered into Dust Ridge looking for work that didn't exist. They wouldn't meet her eyes. Shame did that to people, made them look anywhere but at the truth standing right in front of them. $5,000. Preston Wolf's voice cut through the morning air. He stood 5 feet away, thumbs hooked into his suspenders, a man who wore his wealth like armor. His suit was too clean for this town, pressed and spotless in a place where dust was a permanent resident. That cleanliness wasn't an accident, it was a statement. I am above you. I am separate. I take from you and remain unstained. That's the exact figure Judge Hartwell, $5,000. Eleanor's father stood beside her, reeking of whiskey even at this early hour. His hands shook. Once those hands had held a gavel and dispensed justice in this territory. Once men had respected Judge Hartwell. That was before the bottle, before the gambling, before he'd traded his daughter's future to cover his debts. "I'll pay it back." Eleanor's voice came out steady, which surprised her. "I'll work. 10 years. I'll teach your children, work in the saloon, whatever you need." Wolf laughed. The sound was wet, unpleasant. 10 years? At 15% interest per month after 10 years, that debt becomes $60,000. No girl. The only way this debt disappears is if you become my wife. Legal. Proper. In front of all these witnesses. He stepped closer. The smell of cheap cologne and tobacco smoke rolled off him in waves. Eleanor fought the urge to step back to show weakness. You'll live comfortable, Eleanor. Private room above the saloon. No heavy labor. Just need you to be cooperative. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Accommodating, you might say. The crowd murmured. They understood. Wolf didn't just want a wife. He wanted to break something beautiful to prove that in this town he owned everything and everyone. Eleanor's mind raced through her options like a trapped animal seeking escape. Run. The North Pass was snowed in, wouldn't open until April. The south route led to nothing but empty prairie for 100 miles. Fight against 50 men who wouldn't lift a finger to help her. She looked into the crowd, searching for one face that might show compassion. Nothing. Just averted eyes and shuffling feet. Her father sobbed quietly beside her, too drunk and broken to even form words. The gavel that once symbolized justice now rested in his coat pocket, as useless as the man who carried it. This was how it ended then. 25 years of life leading to this moment, this platform, this choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Then a voice rumbled from the back of the crowd, deep as distant thunder. I'll pay it. The crowd parted like the Red Sea men stepping aside without even realizing they were moving. The speaker emerged from the mass of bodies, and Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. He was massive, 6'8" at least, shoulders broad enough to block out the weak winter sun. A bearskin coat, thick and brown, dusted with snow. Beneath it, clothes that had seen hard use but weren't rags. A Sharps .50 caliber rifle slung across his back, the barrel etched with gold inlay that caught the light. His face was mostly hidden by a beard so thick it might have housed birds, but his eyes. Those steel-gray eyes weren't the eyes of an ignorant hunter. They were the eyes of a man who had killed and would kill again without hesitation. He walked forward, each step measured and deliberate. His boots made heavy sounds against the frozen ground. When he reached the platform, he stopped directly in front of Eleanor. For a moment their eyes met. In that instant, Eleanor saw something impossible. Recognition, as if he'd known her for years, as if he'd been waiting for this exact moment. Wolf recovered first, his voice sharp with suspicion. "Who the hell are you, mountain man?" The stranger didn't answer, didn't even acknowledge Wolf had spoken. He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a leather pouch. Then, with casual indifference, he turned it upside down over the platform. Gold coins spilled out. Not gold dust in a vial, not a few pieces wrapped in cloth. Full minted double eagle gold coins, each worth $20. They rolled and clattered across the wooden planks, catching the light, making sounds like bells. Eleanor counted automatically. 10 coins, 20, 50. The pile grew. 100, 200. The crowd pressed closer, drawn by the impossible sight. 250 coins, $5,000 in gold. Right there. Real. Tangible. The crowd had gone silent. Even Wolf seemed unable to speak, his mouth working soundlessly. The stranger's voice was flat, brooking no argument. "Debt's paid." He turned to Eleanor. Up close, she could see his face better through the beard. Strong jawline. No scars she could see. But it was his eyes that held her. They weren't cruel. They were sad. Deeply, profoundly sad, like a man who'd lost everything and learned to live with the emptiness. "Get your things. 1 hour. We're leaving." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. From Wolf's cage to this stranger's. A man who dressed like a savage but carried enough gold to buy a ranch. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper. Why would you do this? For the first time, something cracked in that stone facade. A flicker of old pain, carefully buried but never quite dead. "Because I know what it's like when nobody comes to save you." He turned away, gathered his gold back into the pouch with practiced efficiency, and walked toward his horse. A massive black stallion that looked like it could run through walls. Thunder. The name came to Eleanor unbidden, appropriate for such a beast. Eleanor stood frozen on the platform, mind reeling. Behind her, her father wept. Ahead of her, the stranger mounted his horse in one fluid motion, and to her left she caught a glimpse of something that made her blood run cold. Preston Wolfe stood beside the saloon entrance, no longer alone. Next to him was another man, tall, well-dressed in a way that made Wolfe's suit look cheap, handsome with sharp features and calculating eyes. This man smiled at Eleanor, not a friendly smile, a predator's smile, the smile of someone who knew exactly what was about to happen. The stranger raised his hand in a mocking wave. Eleanor didn't know why, but that gesture felt like a noose tightening around her neck. She looked back at the mountain man. He sat motionless on his horse, waiting, one cage or another. But at least with this stranger there was a chance. A slim one, perhaps, but a chance nonetheless. Eleanor ran. She ran to the tiny house she'd shared with her father, threw open the door, and grabbed what little she owned. 3 things. Her mother's other dress folded carefully in brown paper, 2 books battered and reread until the pages were soft, and a letter sealed in wax that her mother had written before she died. Eleanor had never opened it. Some days she thought she never would. Her father sat in his chair by the empty fireplace, crying into his hands. Eleanor wanted to feel pity, wanted to feel love. Instead, she felt nothing but a cold, hard anger. "Goodbye, Father." He looked up, face blotchy and red. "Ellie, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "I know." She turned away. "But sorry doesn't change anything." She walked out of that house and didn't look back. The stranger waited where she'd left him. When he saw her carrying her small bundle, he nodded once. Then he dismounted, tied her belongings to the saddle with quick, efficient movements, and lifted her onto Thunder's back as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. Before she could process what was happening, he swung up behind her. His chest was a solid wall at her back. She could feel the heat radiating from him. Even through the thick coat could smell wood smoke and pine, and something expensive. Tobacco, maybe. The good kind that came from Virginia, not the rough cut the miners smoked. "Hold on." That was all the warning she got before Thunder began to move. Not fast, not yet, but purposeful, leaving Dust Ridge behind with every step. Eleanor twisted to look back one final time. The crowd had dispersed, men returning to their meaningless routines. Wolfe stood in the doorway of his saloon, arms crossed, face red with impotent rage, and next to him that other man still smiled, still watched. Who was he? The question died as Thunder picked up speed and Dust Ridge began to shrink behind them. Eleanor turned forward, facing the unknown. Behind her, the stranger's breathing was steady, calm. His arms formed a cage around her as he held the reins, but it didn't feel threatening. It felt like protection. She should have been terrified, should have been plotting escape. Instead, against all logic, Eleanor felt the first stirring of something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. "What's your name?" Her voice barely carried over the sound of hooves on frozen ground. Silence stretched. She thought he wouldn't answer. Then finally, a single word. "Gray." "Your real name?" "Enough." Eleanor wanted to press, but something in his tone made her stop. Fine. If he wanted to be a mystery, let him. She had bigger concerns, like the fact that she was riding into the mountains with a stranger who'd just spent a fortune on her, like the fact that winter was closing in and she had no idea where they were going, like the fact that her entire life had just been upended in the space of an hour. The morning sun climbed higher as they rode. Dust Ridge became a memory, then a speck, then nothing at all. Around them, the landscape shifted from flat prairie to rolling foothills. Snow began to appear in patches, then in drifts, then as a solid blanket covering everything. The cold intensified. Eleanor's thin dress provided almost no protection. She shivered despite herself, teeth chattering. Without a word, Gray shifted behind her. She felt him shrugging out of his massive bearskin coat, a maneuver that should have been impossible on horseback, but that he managed with practiced ease. Then the weight of it settled over her shoulders, still warm from his body heat. "I'll be fine," she protested. "I don't get cold." It was the most he'd said since they left. Eleanor pulled the coat tight around herself, drowning in its size. It smelled like him. Wood smoke, pine needles, and underneath something else, something refined, expensive tobacco, fine soap, not the smells of a mountain hermit. Eleanor filed that observation away, adding it to the growing list of contradictions surrounding this man. They rode in silence through the afternoon. The sun tracked across the sky, providing light but little warmth. The path grew steeper, narrower. They were climbing now, heading into the high peaks of the Teton Range. By the time the sun touched the western horizon, Eleanor's legs ached from gripping the saddle, and her back screamed from sitting upright for hours. Gray seemed tireless, his posture never slumping, his grip on the reins never faltering. Finally, as the light began to fade, he guided Thunder off the main trail toward the sound of rushing water. They emerged into a small clearing beside a waterfall, the cascade frozen in places but still flowing in others, creating a sound like constant whispers. Gray dismounted first, then reached up to help Eleanor down. His hands were large, calloused, but gentle. When her feet touched the ground, her legs nearly buckled. He caught her elbow, steadying her until she found her balance. "Stay near the fire. Don't wander." He set about making camp with the efficiency of long practice, found dry wood despite the snow, built a fire structure that would burn hot and clean, struck flint and steel, had flames going within minutes. Then, while Eleanor huddled by the growing fire, he walked to the stream. What happened next defied belief. Gray stood at the water's edge for perhaps 30 seconds, completely motionless. Then his hand shot out fast as a striking snake and came back with a fat trout thrashing in his grip. No rod, no bait, just raw speed and precision. He killed the fish with a quick twist, gutted it with a knife that appeared from somewhere in his belt, and had it cooking on a stick over the fire before Eleanor's numbed mind caught up with what she'd witnessed. "How did you do that?" He glanced at her firelight reflecting in those gray eyes. "Practice." Minutes later, he handed her the better portion of the cooked fish wrapped in a broadleaf to protect her hands from the heat. The meat was perfectly done, flaky and tender. Eleanor ate mechanically at first, then with real hunger as her body remembered it hadn't had a proper meal in days. Gray ate his portion quickly, efficiently. Then he stood scanning the darkening forest. "You should sleep. Tomorrow's harder." Eleanor wanted to ask questions, wanted to demand answers. Instead, exhaustion pulled at her like a tide. She wrapped herself in the bearskin coat, lay down near the fire, and closed her eyes. Sleep came quickly, but not before she heard Gray's voice so quiet she almost missed it. "I won't let anything happen to you." It should have been reassuring. Instead, it raised more questions, questions that would have to wait for morning. In her dreams, Eleanor saw her mother's face, morning star, beautiful and strong, teaching her daughter to read tracks in the forest, teaching her to be silent, teaching her to survive. "You will need these skills someday, Ellie. When I'm gone, you will need to be strong." Her mother had been right, just 12 years too early. Eleanor woke once in the night to the sound of something moving in the trees. Her eyes shot open, heart hammering, but Gray was already standing, rifle in hand, facing the darkness. He didn't move, didn't speak, just waited with that preternatural stillness. Whatever was out there must have thought better of approaching, because after a long moment the sounds retreated. Gray lowered his rifle but didn't return to sleep. He simply stood there, a sentinel against the night, until Eleanor's eyes grew heavy and closed once more. When morning came, gray and cold, Eleanor woke to find him cooking more fish. He handed her a portion without speaking, then began breaking down the camp. Every movement was precise, nothing wasted. They were back on Thunder within 20 minutes, climbing higher into the mountains. The second day of their journey brought harder terrain. The path, such as it was, wound along cliff edges where a single misstep would mean death. Eleanor found herself gripping Gray's waist without thinking, pressing her face against his back when the drops grew too terrifying to look at. His heartbeat was steady, slow, the heart of a man who feared nothing. That steadiness became Eleanor's anchor as they climbed higher and higher into air so thin it hurt to breathe, into cold so intense her lungs ached with every inhalation. By afternoon, she noticed more details. His hands rough with calluses, yes, but the nails were clean, trimmed, not the hands of a man who lived rough all the time. His speech minimal as it was used perfect grammar. Not, I had me, but I had. Not, ain't, but isn't. And the rifle, that beautiful Sharps 50 caliber with its gold inlay. She caught a glimpse of the engraving when he shifted to avoid a low branch, letters carefully etched into the metal. G.B. for Catherine, 1873. Catherine, a woman's name. Who was she, and who was G.B.? Eleanor wanted to ask, but sensed these were questions that wouldn't be answered. Not yet. Maybe not ever. They made camp again that night in a sheltered hollow beneath an overhang of rock. The wind howled outside, but their little space remained protected. Gray built another fire, caught another fish. The routine was becoming familiar. After eating, Eleanor gathered her courage. "Do you have a family?" Long silence. So long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, staring into the flames, he spoke. "I had. The mountain took them. I'm sorry. Don't be." His voice was hard now. "It wasn't the mountain's fault. It was mine. I wasn't there when they needed me." Eleanor wanted to press to understand, but something in his posture warned her off. Some wounds were too deep to touch. Instead, she asked a different question. "Where are we going?" "Home." "And where is home?" For the first time, the ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You'll see tomorrow." The third day began in fog so thick Eleanor couldn't see Thunder's ears in front of her. Gray navigated by instinct, never hesitating, never second-guessing. The path grew steeper still, became less a path and more a suggestion of passage between rocks. They climbed through the fog for hours. Eleanor lost all sense of time, all sense of place. There was only the horse beneath her, the man behind her, and the endless white nothing surrounding them. Then, just as the sun reached its zenith, they crested a final ridge. The fog parted like a curtain. Eleanor gasped. Below them, hidden in a secret valley ringed by peaks, lay something impossible, a valley so green it hurt to look at after days of white snow. Protected by the surrounding mountains, warmed by thermal springs that created ribbons of steam, the valley was a paradise carved from wilderness, and in the center of that valley stood a house. No, not a house. A mansion. 3 stories of dark oak timber and gray granite. Massive windows, real glass that must have cost a fortune to transport this far. Wraparound porches on every level. Gardens dormant now but clearly tended. Outbuildings. Stables that looked larger than most homes. And people. 8, maybe 10 people in uniforms working around the property. "What?" Eleanor's voice failed her. "What is this?" Gray urged Thunder forward down the winding path into the valley. As they approached, the details became clearer. This wasn't just wealth. This was empire. The kind of wealth that bought railroads and mines and entire towns. They reached the front of the mansion. Gray dismounted, then reached up to help Eleanor down. Her legs were so weak they nearly gave out. He steadied her hands on her waist until she found her footing. She looked up at him, at this man who'd saved her, this man who dressed like a savage but had built a palace in the mountains, this man who was nothing he appeared to be. "Who are you?" Gray pulled off his hat, revealing his face fully for the first time. Even with the beard, Eleanor could see the strong bone structure beneath, the intelligence in those gray eyes, the bearing of someone used to command. "Graham Blackwood." His voice was different now, smoother, educated. "Welcome home, Eleanor." Blackwood. The name hit her like a physical blow. Blackwood Rail and Mining Corporation, one of the 5 largest companies in America, worth millions, possibly tens of millions. The doors to the mansion opened. An elderly woman stepped out dressed in a crisp gray uniform. Her face was kind but worried. "Welcome back, sir. And this must be the new mistress." The woman's eyes took in Eleanor's shabby dress, her disheveled appearance, but showed no judgment. "I'm Margaret Thornton, the housekeeper. I've prepared a bath and laid out clothes." Eleanor's mind spun. Mistress, clothes, bath. None of it made sense. Graham spoke, his voice carrying easy authority. "Thank you, Maggie. Give us a moment." The housekeeper nodded and retreated inside. Graham turned to Eleanor, and for a moment she saw uncertainty in his eyes, as if he wasn't sure what to say, how to explain. "I know you have questions. I'll answer them. But first you need rest, food, warmth." He gestured to the mansion. "This is real, all of it. And for now, at least, it's yours." "For now?" Eleanor's voice came back sharp with suspicion. "What does that mean?" "It means the pass is snowed in. Nobody leaves this valley until April. You're safe here, Eleanor, safer than you've ever been." His expression hardened. "But you're also trapped." There it was, the truth beneath the rescue. She'd traded one cage for another. This one was golden luxurious, filled with comforts she'd never known. But still a cage. Eleanor should have been angry, should have felt betrayed. Instead, she felt something unexpected. Curiosity. Because a man who built a mansion this beautiful, who spent $5,000 to save a stranger who looked at her with such profound sadness in his eyes, that man was more than just a rich eccentric. He was a mystery. And Eleanor had always loved solving mysteries. "Show me inside." Graham's eyebrows rose slightly as if he'd expected resistance. Then he nodded, a faint smile crossing his lips. "As you wish." He led her through the double doors into a foyer that took her breath away. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine. A chandelier with hundreds of crystal pieces catching light from somewhere and throwing rainbows across the walls. A sweeping staircase of dark wood curving up to the second floor. To the right, a library with floor-to-ceiling shelves crammed with books. To the left, a sitting room with furniture that looked like it belonged in a palace. Ahead, a hallway that seemed to stretch forever. "Maggie will show you to your room," Graham said. "Dinner is at 7. We'll talk then." He turned to go, then paused. Without looking back, he added, "I know you're frightened. I know you're angry. But I promise you, Eleanor, I didn't bring you here to hurt you." "Then why?" she had to ask. "Why me?" He was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet she almost missed it. "Because you remind me that some things are worth saving." Then he walked away down a side corridor, leaving Eleanor standing in a foyer worth more than her entire town. Maggie appeared at her elbow, gentle but firm. "Come, Miss Hartwell, let's get you cleaned up. You've had a long journey." Eleanor followed in a daze. Up the stairs, down a hallway lined with paintings, through a door into a bedroom that was larger than the house she'd grown up in. And in that room, waiting for her, was a copper bathtub filled with steaming water that smelled of lavender, clean towels, soft robes, and through an open door, a closet filled with dresses. 15, maybe 20 of them. Silk, satin, velvet, colors she'd only seen in magazines. And every single one looked like it would fit her perfectly. Maggie saw her staring. The housekeeper's voice was carefully neutral. "Mr. Blackwood ordered them from San Francisco 6 months ago." 6 months. He'd been planning this for 6 months. Eleanor's hands began to shake. This wasn't a rescue. This was something else, something planned, calculated. She was standing in a beautiful prison, and she'd walked in willingly. Maggie seemed to sense her distress. The older woman placed a gentle hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "Miss Hartwell, I know you're afraid, but Mr. Blackwood, he's not a bad man. He's a hurt man. There's a difference." "What hurt him?" Maggie's eyes grew sad. "That's his story to tell, not mine. But I'll say this. He hasn't had a woman in this house for 5 years, since his wife died. You're the first." Wife. The word hung in the air like a ghost. Maggie patted Eleanor's shoulder once more, then moved toward the door. "Take your time with the bath. I'll come back in an hour to help you dress for dinner." Then Eleanor was alone in the enormous room, staring at a bathtub that promised warmth and comfort, surrounded by wealth she couldn't comprehend, trapped in a valley with a man she didn't know. A man who'd been planning to bring her here for 6 months. A man who'd lost a wife. A man who looked at Eleanor like she was both salvation and damnation. She should run, should find a way out, should do anything but stay in this place. Instead, Eleanor locked the door, stripped off her filthy dress, and sank into the hot water. It was the first truly warm bath she'd had in 2 years, and despite everything, despite all her fears and confusion, it felt like heaven. As the heat seeped into her bones, her mind began to work. 6 months of planning, a dead wife, enough wealth to buy a small country, and those eyes, those sad, haunted gray eyes that held secrets Eleanor couldn't begin to guess. Whatever Graham Blackwood wanted from her, it was more than just companionship, more than just a pretty face to fill an empty house. He was looking for something specific, something he thought Eleanor could provide. She needed to find out what that was before she committed to anything, before this golden cage closed around her completely. Eleanor lay back in the tub, closed her eyes, and began to plan. The game had only just begun, and she intended to play it smart. Because if there was one thing Morningstar had taught her daughter, it was this: the hunted can become the hunter if they're clever enough. An hour passed like a dream. Eleanor emerged from the bath, her skin pink and warm for the first time in days. Maggie returned as promised, moving through the room with quiet efficiency. The housekeeper helped Eleanor into undergarments softer than anything she'd ever touched, then into a dress of midnight blue velvet that fit as if it had been made for her body specifically. Because it had been, 6 months ago, by someone who knew her measurements without ever asking. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, Eleanor found herself curious. How had Graham Blackwood known? Had he been watching her that long? Longer. Maggie worked on Eleanor's hair, brushing out the tangles with patient strokes. In the mirror, Eleanor barely recognized herself. The hollow-cheeked woman who'd stood on that platform in Dustridge had been replaced by someone who looked almost elegant, almost like she belonged in a place like this. Almost. "There," Maggie said softly, stepping back. "Beautiful, just as Mr. Blackwood said you would be. He said that he did. 6 months ago when he ordered the dresses. He said, and I quote, 'Find clothes for a woman who doesn't know she's beautiful yet.'" Maggie's eyes were kind in the mirror. He was right about that at least. Before Eleanor could respond, a clock somewhere in the house chimed 7 times. Maggie gestured toward the door. "Time for dinner. I'll walk you down." They descended the grand staircase together. Eleanor's hand gripped the polished banister, steadying herself. The dress whispered against her legs with each step, an unfamiliar sensation. At the bottom, Maggie guided her to the right, through a doorway, into a dining room that made Eleanor's breath catch. A long table of dark wood polished until it reflected the chandelier above. Place settings of silver and crystal, candles burning in elaborate holders, and at the head of the table a man Eleanor almost didn't recognize. Graham Blackwood had shaved. Gone was the thick beard that had hidden half his face. In its place was a strong jaw, aristocratic cheekbones, a face that belonged on a coin or a portrait. His dark hair was combed back, still damp from what must have been his own bath. He wore a black suit perfectly tailored that emphasized the width of his shoulders and the lean power of his frame. This wasn't a mountain man. This was a tycoon, a king in his hidden kingdom. He stood when Eleanor entered, a gesture of courtesy that seemed automatic. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment neither spoke. Eleanor saw him taking in her appearance, saw something flicker in those gray eyes. Approval, maybe, or satisfaction, or something else entirely. "Eleanor." His voice was different now, too. Smooth, educated, the rough edges filed away. "You look adequate." Adequate. The word hung in the air like an insult. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks, but it was anger, not embarrassment. "Adequate." She walked toward the table, her chin high. "I look like a queen, Mr. Blackwood, and you look like a fraud." For a moment she thought she'd gone too far. Then Graham laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face. "Please sit. The trout was good, but tonight we have venison and a Bordeaux from 1870. Eleanor sat, her mind racing. He'd admitted it without admitting it. The facade was gone. Now came the real conversation. A servant appeared, an older man in a crisp uniform, pouring wine and serving food with practiced silence. Eleanor waited until he'd left before speaking. "Who are you really?" Graham cut his meat with precise movements. "People in town call me a hermit, a savage. I prefer it that way." "That's not an answer." "It is, just not the one you wanted." He took a sip of wine, then set the glass down with deliberate care. "My full name is Graham Blackwood. I own the Blackwood Rail and Mining Corporation. If you've ridden a train west of the Mississippi or spent a dollar coin, you've likely contributed to my accounts." The Blackwood Corporation. Eleanor knew the name, had heard miners curse, it had heard businessmen speak of it with reverence. It was an empire, one of the great industrial beasts that had reshaped America after the war. "You're the railroad king," she whispered, "the one they write about in newspapers, the one who never shows his face." "That's what they call me, yes." "Then why live like this? Why pretend to be someone else?" Graham set down his knife and fork, giving her his full attention. When he spoke, his voice carried weight, the accumulated pain of years. "Because down there, everyone wants something. They want my money, my power, or my life. Politicians want bribes. Business rivals want my roots. Men I've never met want me dead because I represent everything they'll never have." He gestured toward the window, toward the valley, hidden in darkness beyond. "Up here I'm just a man. And when I go down to town looking like a beggar, I see people's true faces." He leaned forward slightly, intensity in his gaze. "I saw Wolf's greed. I saw the town's cowardice. And I saw your dignity. You were teaching children who couldn't pay you. You nursed your father when he was too drunk to stand. You buried 6 children with your own hands when the mine collapsed last winter." Eleanor's breath caught. "You were there at the mine collapse?" "I'm always there. People just don't see me when I don't want them to." The implications crashed over her. He'd been watching. Not for 6 months. Longer. Much longer. Every moment of her life in Dust Ridge, every act of kindness she'd thought was private, he'd been there, observing, judging, deciding if she was worthy of whatever plan he had in mind. "So, I'm what? A reward for being a good person? A pet project for a bored millionaire?" "No." The word came out sharp. "You're a survivor, Eleanor, like me. Catherine was gentle and the world killed her. I brought you here because you're strong, because you know how to endure." Catherine. There was that name again, the woman whose name was engraved on his rifle. "Your wife." Graham's face went very still. "Yes." "And where is she now?" "Dead, 5 years ago, along with our son." He picked up his wine glass, drained it in one swallow. "I was in Chicago closing a deal, $2 million, the biggest contract of my career. She went into labor early. I got the telegram 36 hours too late. By the time I made it back, they'd both been buried for 3 days. The raw pain in his voice was palpable. Eleanor felt something shift inside her, anger giving way to understanding. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was my choice. The deal or my family. I chose the deal." He poured himself more wine with a hand that trembled slightly. "I built this place afterward. Built it to be perfect, safe, everything she needed and never had. But she wasn't here to see it." Eleanor set down her fork, no longer hungry. "And now you've brought me here, to fill that empty space." "No." Graham's eyes met hers, fierce and desperate. "You're not a replacement, Eleanor. You're a reminder that maybe I can save something, someone. Maybe I can do it right this time." "I don't need saving." "I know. That's why I chose you." The conversation died there, both of them retreating into their own thoughts. The servant returned, cleared plates, brought dessert. Eleanor barely tasted it. Her mind was too full of new information, new questions. When dinner finally ended, Graham stood. "You're free to explore the house. The library has 3,000 books. The music room has a piano if you play. Your room has everything you need. Only one request." "What?" "Stay away from the third floor. The room at the end of the hall is locked. I'd prefer it stay that way." Before Eleanor could ask why he'd left the room, footsteps echoing down the hallway, then fading into silence. Eleanor stood alone in the dining room, surrounded by wealth and luxury, feeling more trapped than she had on that platform in Dust Ridge. The next 3 days followed a pattern. Eleanor woke in comfort, ate meals prepared by unseen hands, and wandered the enormous house like a ghost. She explored the library, running her fingers along leather spines, pulling down volumes on engineering, philosophy, poetry. She found the music room, sat at the piano, played hesitant notes that echoed in the empty space. Graham appeared for meals, but spoke little. He spent his days in a room on the first floor that Maggie called his office, sending and receiving telegraph messages, managing an empire from his hidden valley. He was polite, but distant, as if he'd said everything that needed saying that first night and saw no reason to continue. Eleanor should have been relieved. Instead, she found herself frustrated, curious, wanting to understand this man who'd upended her life. On the 4th day, she made a decision. She was going to find out what was on the 3rd floor. That evening, after Graham had retired to his office and the servants had finished their duties, Eleanor climbed the stairs. 1st floor to 2nd, 2nd to 3rd. The hallway stretched before her doors on either side, most standing open to reveal empty rooms or storage spaces. At the very end, one door stood closed, and unlike the others, this one had a lock. Eleanor approached slowly, feeling like a thief in the night. She knelt, peering through the old-fashioned keyhole. The room beyond was dark, but in the faint light from the hallway she could make out shapes. A crib, a rocking chair, a trunk against one wall, a nursery, frozen in time, waiting for a child who would never come home. "I wouldn't go in there if I were you." Eleanor jumped, spinning around. Maggie stood behind her face, grave in the dim light. "I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't, but I needed to know." "Know what?" Maggie moved closer, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "What Mr. Blackwood lost. That was the nursery. For the son he never got to hold. For the wife who died giving birth to him. How did she die? Was it complications? Did the doctor fail?" Maggie's expression turned even sadder. "There was no doctor. That's the thing, Miss Hartwell. Catherine was supposed to have the best care. Graham had arranged everything. A specialist from Denver was supposed to arrive a week before her due date, but the baby came early, and Graham was in Chicago, and the doctor got delayed by a storm." The housekeeper's voice broke slightly. "I was there. I did everything I could, but I'm not a doctor. The bleeding wouldn't stop. The baby was breech. By the time I got him turned, Catherine was too weak. She held her son for maybe 3 minutes. Then she was gone. The baby followed 3 days later." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "That's horrible." "It gets worse. Catherine left a letter. I read it before Graham locked it away in that room. She wrote, 'I forgive you, but you must forgive yourself.'" Maggie shook her head. "He never has. He's been punishing himself for 5 years, building this perfect place, living like a hermit, punishing himself by denying himself any kind of happiness. Until he brought me here. Yes, until you." Maggie studied Eleanor's face. "You look like her, you know. Not exactly, but the same coloring, same build, same eyes. I think that's part of why he chose you." The revelation hit Eleanor like a physical blow. She wasn't just a survivor he admired. She was a ghost he was trying to resurrect, a second chance at the life he'd lost. "I need to talk to him." "Be careful, Miss Hartwell. Graham Blackwood is a good man under all that pain, but he's also a man who's used to getting what he wants, and right now he wants redemption. He thinks you can give it to him." Eleanor straightened her spine, drawing on reserves of courage she'd forgotten she possessed. "Then he's about to learn I'm not a ghost. I'm a person, and I make my own choices." She marched down the stairs, through the hallways, straight to Graham's office. The door was closed. She didn't bother knocking, just pushed it open and stepped inside. Graham looked up from his desk, surprise flashing across his face. Papers covered the surface maps and contracts and telegrams. This was his war room, the place from which he commanded his empire. "Eleanor, it's late. Is something wrong?" "I saw the nursery." His expression hardened. "I told you to stay away from the third floor." "I don't take orders well. Never have." Eleanor moved into the room, closing the door behind her. "I know about Catherine. I know about your son. I know you blame yourself. You know nothing." He stood towering over her, voice cold. "You don't know what it's like to choose money over love. You don't know what it's like to arrive home and find everyone you love dead and buried. You don't know." "You're right. I don't know that. But I know grief." Eleanor stood her ground. "My mother was killed when I was 12, shot by a drunk hunter who thought she was an animal. I tried to save her, jumped on the man's back, tried to stop him. He cut me." She held up her left wrist, showing him the scar that ran from her palm to halfway up her forearm. "This is what I got for trying to be brave. This and the memory of my mother's blood on my hands." Graham stared at the scar, something shifting in his expression. "So don't tell me I don't understand loss." Eleanor continued, her voice steady, despite the tears threatening to fall. "Don't tell me I don't understand what it's like to be helpless. The difference between us is that you're punishing yourself. You've built a beautiful prison and locked yourself inside. You brought me here thinking I could save you from that prison. But I can't, Graham. Only you can do that." Silence filled the room, heavy and profound. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. A storm was coming. Graham turned away, walked to the window, stared out at the darkness. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "What if I can't? What if I try to forgive myself and I just can't? Then you're going to die in this valley alone and bitter, surrounded by all this wealth and comfort, but without a single person who actually knows you. Is that what you want?" He didn't answer, didn't move. The silence stretched so long, Eleanor thought maybe she'd pushed too far. Then his shoulders began to shake. At first she thought he was laughing. Then she realized he was crying. Sobbing, actually. The kind of deep, wrenching sobs that came from years of held-back grief finally breaking free. Eleanor moved without thinking. Crossed the room. Put her arms around him from behind. He was so much larger than her that it should have been absurd. But somehow it wasn't. Somehow in that moment Graham Blackwood needed someone to hold him while he fell apart. They stood that way for a long time. Outside, the first snowflakes of a new storm began to fall. Inside, a man who'd spent 5 years in self-imposed exile finally allowed himself to grieve. When the tears finally stopped, Graham pulled away gently, wiping his face with the back of his hand. He didn't look at Eleanor, wouldn't meet her eyes. "I'm sorry. That was inappropriate." "No, it was human. There's a difference." He turned then, and the look in his eyes was something Eleanor had never seen before. Raw, open, vulnerable in a way that made her heart ache. "I don't know what to do with you, Eleanor Hartwell. I brought you here for one reason, and now I'm not sure that reason makes sense anymore." "What reason?" "To prove I could save someone. To prove I wasn't the monster who let his wife die alone." "But you don't need saving. You never did. And now I've trapped you here, and I don't know how to fix that." Eleanor took a step closer. She should have been angry, should have demanded he let her go. Instead, she found herself saying something unexpected. "Maybe we save each other." Graham's eyes widened. Before he could respond, before Eleanor could second-guess her words, a sound shattered the moment. A pounding on the front door. Heavy, insistent. The kind of knocking that demanded immediate attention. Graham's entire demeanor changed in an instant. The vulnerable man disappeared, replaced by something harder. Dangerous. He pulled open a drawer in his desk, withdrew a revolver, checked the cylinder with practiced efficiency. "Stay here. Lock the door behind me." "What's happening?" "I don't know. But no one travels in this weather unless they have to. And no one comes to this valley unless they're looking for trouble." He moved toward the door, gun held low, but ready. Eleanor's instinct was to follow to see what was happening, but something in Graham's expression stopped her. The pounding came again, louder, more insistent. Graham left the office. Eleanor heard his footsteps crossing the foyer, heard the heavy bolt of the front door being drawn back, heard the door open and a blast of freezing wind rush through the house. Then she heard a voice, male, cultured, amused. "Hello, little brother. Aren't you going to invite me in? Or do you leave family to freeze in the storm?" Eleanor's blood ran cold. Brother. Graham had a brother. And from the tone of that voice, the casual cruelty in those words, she knew immediately. This was not a friendly visit. She moved to the office door, cracked it open just enough to see into the foyer. Graham stood in the doorway blocking the entrance. Beyond him, barely visible through the swirling snow, stood a man flanked by 4 others. The man in front was tall, almost as tall as Graham. He wore a fine coat, expensive gloves. His face was handsome in a sharp, predatory way, and he was smiling. "You were supposed to be in prison," Graham said, his voice flat and cold. "And you were supposed to be dead. Life is full of disappointments." The man stepped forward, forcing Graham to either move or start shooting. "I think we have a lot to discuss, brother. Don't you?" Graham stepped aside. He had no choice. To leave a man in the storm would be murder, and whatever else he was, Graham Blackwood still followed some code of honor. The man and his 4 companions entered tracking snow and cold air into the beautiful foyer. Eleanor got a better look at them now. The 4 flanking the speaker were clearly hired guns, hard men with harder eyes, hands never far from the weapons at their belts. But the speaker, he was something else entirely. His eyes swept the foyer, taking in the luxury, the wealth, with a mixture of contempt and satisfaction. Then his gaze landed on the partially open office door, on Eleanor watching from the shadows. His smile widened. "And this must be the replacement. She's prettier than Catherine. Tell me, does she break as easily?" Graham moved faster than Eleanor thought possible for a man his size. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, grabbed his brother by the throat, slammed him against the wall hard enough to rattle the chandelier. "You speak of her again, Vincent, and I'll bury you in the drift outside." Vincent laughed, a choking sound, with Graham's hand crushing his windpipe. The 4 gunmen tensed hands, moving toward their weapons, but Vincent raised a hand, stopping them. "Relax, brother. I'm just making observations. You always did get defensive about your toys." Vincent's eyes never left Eleanor, even as his face turned red from lack of air. "Though I have to say your taste has improved, this one looks like she might have some fight in her." Graham released him suddenly, stepping back. Vincent coughed, rubbing his throat, but he was still smiling, still looking at Eleanor with those cold, calculating eyes. "Maggie!" Graham called, not taking his eyes off Vincent. "Take the men to the bunkhouse. Give them blankets and whiskey." "The bunkhouse?" One of the gunmen spat. "This mansion has 20 rooms. We ain't sleeping in no bunkhouse." "You sleep where I tell you, or you sleep in hell." Graham's voice carried absolute authority. The gunman fell silent. Vincent raised a hand again, a gesture of false reasonableness. "The bunkhouse is fine, boys. Go on. I'll catch up after I've had a drink with my baby brother and his new bride." The gunmen left Maggie leading them with visible reluctance. Eleanor watched them go, counting. 4 gunmen, plus Vincent, against Graham Thomas, the assistant she'd glimpsed earlier, and whatever other staff lived on the property. Not good odds if things turned violent. When the door closed behind them, Vincent turned his full attention to Graham. The smile never wavered. "So, are we going to do this standing in the foyer, or shall we have that drink?" Graham gestured toward the sitting room. "After you." Vincent walked with the confidence of a man who knew he held all the cards. Graham followed, the revolver still in his hand. And Eleanor, despite every instinct screaming at her to hide, stepped out of the office and followed them both. Vincent settled himself on a velvet sofa with casual ownership, as if he'd done it 1,000 times before. Graham remained standing, positioning himself between Vincent and Eleanor. The message was clear. "You'll have to go through me to get to her." Vincent noticed. Of course he did. His smile grew even wider. "Protective already. How sweet. Though we both know how well your protection works, don't we? Catherine certainly found out. Graham's hand tightened on the revolver. Eleanor saw his finger move toward the trigger. She spoke quickly, instinctively. Mr. Blackwood, perhaps you could introduce us properly? Both men turned to look at her. Graham's expression was unreadable. Vincent's was delighted. Ah, she speaks, and so politely, too. Vincent stood, executed a mocking bow. Vincent Blackwood at your service, elder brother to this mountain of righteousness standing before you, former businessman, current, shall we say, entrepreneur. Former prisoner, you mean, Graham said. 8 years for sabotage and murder. I prefer to think of it as aggressive business tactics, and the murder charge was never proven. Vincent's eyes glittered. Besides, we both know who really gave the orders that night. I just had the misfortune of being the one holding the dynamite when the law arrived. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Graham had given the orders. Vincent had taken the fall, and now Vincent was here for payback. Eleanor's mind raced, putting together pieces. The railroad wars of the 1870s. The sabotage. The deaths. She'd been a child, but she remembered the newspapers, the outcry. 12 men had died when a tunnel collapsed. The investigation had pointed to rival companies destroying each other's lines. Someone had gone to prison for it. Vincent, Graham's brother, the scapegoat. I paid your legal fees, Graham said, voice tight. I set you up with money when you got out. Money I gambled away in 3 months, yes, your generous severance package. Vincent poured himself a glass of whiskey from a decanter on the side table, didn't offer any to Graham or Eleanor. But I'm not here about money, baby brother. Well, not just money. Then what do you want? Vincent took a long sip, savoring it. I want what was mine. Father left Blackwood Corporation to both of us. 50-50. Equal partners. Then you tricked me into signing away my rights while I rotted in that cell. You became the railroad king while I became prisoner number 437. I bought you out to save the company from your incompetence. Incompetence. Vincent's voice went sharp, for the first time, the pleasant mask slipping. I did exactly what you told me to do. You said stop them. You said we needed to act decisively. So I acted, and when it went wrong, you threw me to the wolves. Graham said nothing. The silence was damning. So here's what's going to happen. Vincent continued, his voice returning to that dangerous calm. You're going to sign over 50% of Blackwood Corporation to me, tonight, and you're going to transfer half the revenue from the Silver Peak mine into my accounts. Then I'll leave. We'll never see each other again. You can go back to playing hermit with your pretty new toy. And if I refuse? Vincent's smile turned vicious. Then the boys in the bunkhouse might get restless. Accidents happen in storms, Graham. Fires start. People fall downstairs. Women disappear. His eyes slid to Eleanor, lingering with obvious intent. Would be a shame for history to repeat itself. Another woman dying because Graham Blackwood put business before protecting what's his. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Eleanor saw Graham's entire body coil, ready to spring. The revolver came up, pointing directly at Vincent's heart. Get out. Can't, brother. Storm's too bad. And my men are already settling in. We're here for the duration. The pass won't open until April. That gives us, 3 months? Vincent stood completely unafraid of the gun pointed at him. 3 months to come to an understanding. Think about my offer, because the alternative is going to be very unpleasant for everyone, especially for her. He walked toward the door, paused at the threshold. Oh, and Graham, it's good to see you again. I've missed our little family chats. Then he was gone, leaving Graham and Eleanor alone in the sitting room with the ghost of his threat hanging between them. Graham lowered the gun slowly, his face ashen. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Eleanor. I never thought he'd find me here. Never thought he'd be out of prison so soon. How long was his sentence? 20 years. He's only served 8. Graham ran his free hand through his hair, disturbing its careful arrangement. Someone must have paid for his release, someone with money and influence. Someone who wants revenge on you." "Yes." Graham finally looked at her, and in his eyes Eleanor saw something she recognized. Fear. Not for himself. For her. "I've put you in danger. Again. Just like Catherine. Just like everyone I've ever tried to protect." Eleanor moved closer, put her hand on his arm. "Then we'll face it together. You said I don't need saving. Prove it. Trust me to help." Graham stared at her, something shifting in his expression. Hope maybe. Or the faint stirring of belief that maybe, just maybe, this time could be different. Outside, the storm intensified. The wind howled like wolves. And somewhere in the bunkhouse, 4 killers and 1 vengeful brother settled in for a siege that would test everything Eleanor and Graham were made of. The war for the mountain had begun. And Eleanor Hartwell, the schoolteacher from Dust Ridge, who'd thought her greatest battle was surviving poverty, was about to discover she was capable of violence she'd never imagined. Because when survival was on the line, when the choice was kill or be killed, even the gentlest soul could become a warrior. Her mother had taught her that. Morning Star had known what the world did to gentle things. Had known her daughter would need to be harder than stone to survive. Eleanor just hadn't realized how soon she'd need those lessons. She was about to find out. The first night passed in tense silence. Graham refused to leave Eleanor alone, stationing himself outside her bedroom door like a sentinel. She heard him pacing throughout the night, boots creaking on the floorboards, the occasional sound of him checking his revolver's cylinder. Eleanor didn't sleep. How could she? Every sound became a potential threat. Every gust of wind against the windows sounded like footsteps. She lay in that luxurious bed surrounded by silk and comfort and felt more vulnerable than she had standing on that platform in Dust Ridge. At least there she'd known what she was facing. Here the danger wore a smile and spoke with cultured words, but it was no less deadly for its polish. When dawn finally broke gray and weak through the snow-covered windows, Eleanor rose and dressed herself. She chose the plainest dress in the wardrobe, a dark gray wool that wouldn't show dirt or blood. The thought surprised her. Blood. Was she really thinking in those terms already? Yes. Because Vincent Blackwood hadn't traveled through a blizzard to have a philosophical discussion with his brother. He'd come for revenge, and men like that didn't leave until they got what they wanted, or until they were stopped. Eleanor found Graham in the dining room staring at a plate of food he hadn't touched. He looked up when she entered, dark circles under his eyes, testimony to his sleepless night. "You should eat something," she said, sitting across from him. "So should you." They ate in silence, both aware of Maggie hovering in the doorway, wringing her hands. The normally cheerful housekeeper looked terrified, and Eleanor couldn't blame her. "Where's Thomas?" Eleanor asked. She'd seen Graham's assistant only once since arriving, a young man with dark hair and a missing left ear. "I sent him to check the telegraph lines this morning. If Vincent cut them, we need to know." Graham pushed his plate away, food barely touched. "I also need to know what resources we have. How much ammunition, how many people I can trust." "You think it's going to come to that fighting? I know my brother. He didn't come here to negotiate. He came here to take, and he brought 4 killers to help him do it." Graham's eyes met hers, and in them Eleanor saw the truth he didn't want to speak aloud. "We might not survive this." But what he said was, "I need you to stay in your room today. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me or Maggie." "No." Graham blinked, surprised. "No, I'm not going to hide while you face this alone. If Vincent is as dangerous as you say, you need every advantage. That includes me. You're a schoolteacher, Eleanor, not a soldier. My mother was Cherokee. She taught me things before she died. How to track, how to move silently, how to survive." Eleanor leaned forward, her voice intense. "And more importantly, I know what it's like to be underestimated. Vincent thinks I'm just a pretty decoration you acquired. Let him keep thinking that. It might save our lives." Graham studied her for a long moment, seeing her perhaps for the first time as something other than a person to protect. Finally he nodded. "All right, but you follow my lead. If I tell you to run, you run. Understood?" "Understood." Thomas returned an hour later with news that made Graham's face go hard as stone. The telegraph lines had been cut, all of them. Someone had climbed the poles during the night and severed every connection to the outside world. They were isolated, completely cut off. No way to call for help. No way to reach the authorities in Denver or the U.S. Marshals. Just them trapped in this valley with 5 men who'd come to destroy them. Vincent appeared for lunch alone, still wearing that infuriating smile. He sat at the dining table as if he owned it, helping himself to food and wine with casual entitlement. "Sleep well, brother." "What do you want, Vincent?" "I told you last night. 50% of the company, half the Silver Peak revenue. That's not unreasonable. It's what Father wanted originally." "Father wanted the company to succeed. He knew you'd destroy it within a year." Vincent's smile thinned. "Father was a fool. He thought strength meant working yourself to death. He thought love was weakness. He was wrong about a lot of things. He was right about you." The words hung in the air like a slap. Vincent set down his fork with exaggerated care, dabbing his mouth with a napkin. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its pleasant veneer. "Do you know what 8 years in prison does to a man, Graham? It strips away everything soft, everything civilized. It teaches you that the only thing that matters is power, the power to hurt people before they hurt you." He leaned forward. "I learned a lot in those 8 years, about patience, about planning, about revenge." "Is that what this is? Revenge?" "Partly, but it's also about justice. You took everything from me, my freedom, my future, my love." His eyes flicked to Eleanor, then back to Graham. "Yes, I loved Catherine first. Did you know that we courted for 6 months before Father decided she should marry you instead? The strong son, the capable one, the one who could produce worthy heirs." Eleanor saw Graham's hands clench into fists beneath the table. Vincent noticed too, and his smile returned. "She told me she was sorry. The night before your wedding. She came to my room and cried and said she wished things were different, but Father had decided. And Catherine, sweet Catherine, she always did what she was told." Vincent's voice turned vicious. "Right up until she died alone, because you chose a business deal over being there when she needed you." Graham lunged across the table. His hands closed around Vincent's throat, and for a moment Eleanor thought he would actually kill his brother right there. But Vincent didn't fight back. He just smiled, even as his face turned red, even as his air was cut off. Then one of the gunmen appeared in the doorway, rifle raised. Cole Eleanor remembered, the tall one with the scar across his cheek. "Let him go, Blackwood, or I start shooting." Graham released Vincent, slowly stepping back. Vincent coughed, rubbing his throat, but he was still smiling. "See, this is why you'll lose, Graham. You let emotions control you. I stopped doing that years ago." He stood, straightening his jacket. "You have until tomorrow to make a decision. Sign over what's mine or things get unpleasant. And trust me, brother, you haven't seen unpleasant yet." He left Cole following. The moment they were gone, Graham slammed his fist into the table hard enough to crack the wood. "He's going to kill us," Eleanor said quietly. "Even if you sign, he won't let us live." "I know." Graham's voice was hollow. "He wants me to watch everything I love burn before he kills me. That's why he's taking his time. That's why he brought 4 men instead of just shooting me the moment I opened the door." "Then we can't let him dictate the terms. We need to act first." Graham looked at her, something shifting in his expression. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we stop being prey and start being predators." That night, Eleanor sought out Maggie. She found the housekeeper in the kitchen preparing dinner with shaking hands. "Maggie, I need your help." The older woman turned face pale. "Miss Hartwell, you should be in your room. Those men, they've been drinking, getting bold. I heard them talking about you." "I know. That's why I need to learn how to protect myself." Eleanor kept her voice low. "Graham has guns. I need to learn how to use them." Maggie's eyes widened. "You want to shoot someone?" "I want to survive. There's a difference." Eleanor moved closer. "You were here when Catherine died. You've seen what happens when women wait for men to save them. I won't make that mistake." Something fierce sparked in Maggie's eyes. "The wine cellar. There's a back staircase that leads there. Mr. Blackwood used to practice shooting in the cellar. The stone walls are thick. Sound doesn't carry." "Show me." Maggie led her through the house down a narrow servant staircase Eleanor hadn't known existed into a cellar that stretched beneath the entire mansion. Racks of wine covered 3 walls, but the 4th wall was different, scarred with bullet holes. Targets hung at various distances, and on a table near the stairs sat 3 rifles and a box of ammunition. Eleanor picked up the smallest Winchester, felt its weight, its balance. Heavier than she'd expected, but manageable. Maggie moved beside her, hands surprisingly steady now that they had a purpose. "My late husband taught me before he died. The basics haven't changed." She positioned Eleanor, adjusting her stance. "Stock to your shoulder, cheek to the wood, look down the sight, breathe out slowly, squeeze the trigger, don't pull." Eleanor followed the instructions, aimed at a target 20 feet away, and fired. The recoil slammed into her shoulder hard enough to make her stumble back. The bullet went wide, hitting the stone wall 3 feet from the target. Again. They practiced for an hour. Eleanor's shoulder ached. Her ears rang despite the thick walls muffling the sound. But slowly, painfully, she began to improve. Her shots started hitting the target. Not the center, not yet, but at least she was hitting something. "That's enough for tonight," Maggie finally said. "If you shoot much more, you won't be able to lift your arm tomorrow." Eleanor lowered the rifle muscles, trembling from the strain, but she felt something new. Power. The knowledge that she wasn't helpless anymore, that if Vincent or his men came for her, she could fight back. "Thank you, Maggie." "Don't thank me yet. Hitting a target that's standing still is one thing. Hitting a man who's trying to kill you is another entirely." Maggie's expression was grim. "I've seen what guns do to people, Miss Hartwell. The blood, the screaming. Are you prepared for that?" Eleanor thought of her mother. Thought of Morning Star lying in the dirt, blood spreading across her chest, life fading from her eyes, while Eleanor screamed and screamed. Thought of being 12 years old and helpless. "Yes, I'm prepared." The lie came easily, because the truth was, Eleanor had no idea if she could actually pull the trigger when it mattered. Targets didn't bleed, didn't beg, didn't have families who would mourn them, but Vincent's men did. And if it came down to their lives or hers, Eleanor needed to be ready to make that choice. The next 2 days followed a pattern of escalating tension. Vincent's men grew bolder, walking through the house as if they owned it. Cole made a point of standing too close to Eleanor whenever their paths crossed, breathing in her scent, letting his eyes crawl over her body. Graham stayed close, a permanent shadow, but he couldn't be everywhere at once. Thomas, the assistant, took a beating on the 3rd day. 2 of the gunmen, Bran and Hayes, cornered him in the stable and broke 3 of his ribs, claiming he'd disrespected them. Thomas lay in bed now, coughing blood, unable to stand. 1 defender down, the odds growing worse by the hour. On the 4th night, Eleanor woke to the sound of breaking glass. She sat up, heart pounding, and saw smoke seeping under her door. Fire. They were trying to burn them out. She grabbed the Winchester she'd hidden under her bed, threw on a robe, and ran into the hallway. Smoke choked the air. Below, she could hear shouting. Men's voices. Graham's voice, commanding and sharp. Eleanor ran toward the stairs, then stopped. Fire lit the foyer below, spreading fast across the expensive rugs, and standing in the middle of the inferno was Vincent, watching the flames with satisfaction. Come out, brother, time to negotiate." Movement on the stairs. Graham descended, revolver in hand, face set in grim determination. Behind him came Ruth, Maggie's daughter, carrying buckets of water. Eleanor made a decision. She ran the opposite direction toward the servants' stairs. If she could get to the kitchen, get to the pump, she could help fight the fire from another angle. She burst into the kitchen and stopped dead. One of Vincent's men stood there. Jack, the youngest of the 4, barely 20, but with eyes that had seen too much too soon. He'd been looting the pantry, filling a bag with food. When Eleanor appeared, he dropped the bag and pulled his knife. "Well now, what do we have here?" Eleanor raised the Winchester, hands shaking. "Stay back," Jack laughed. You even know how to use that little girl. I'm warning you. And I'm warning you. Put down the gun before you hurt yourself." He took a step closer, knife glinting in the dim light. "The boss said I could have some fun once we were done with Blackwood. Guess I'm starting early." Eleanor pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. Safety. She'd forgotten the safety. Jack lunged. Eleanor swung the rifle like a club, catching him across the face. He stumbled, swore, blood pouring from his broken nose. Eleanor fumbled with the safety, got it off, raised the rifle again. Jack recovered faster than she expected. He was on her before she could aim, knife slashing. Eleanor dodged, felt the blade slice across her forearm, shallow but painful. She fell back, hit the kitchen table, went down hard. Jack loomed over her, knife raised for a killing blow. "Should have stayed in your room, pretty thing." Eleanor remembered Maggie's words. Stock to shoulder. Breathe out. Squeeze. She pulled the trigger. The Winchester roared. The bullet took Jack in the chest, dead center, exactly where Eleanor had aimed. For a moment he just stood there, surprise on his young face. Then he fell, hitting the floor with a heavy thud. Blood spread across the kitchen floor, dark and wet. Jack twitched once, twice, then went still. His eyes stared at nothing, already glazing over. Eleanor stared at what she'd done, at the life she'd just taken. Her hands shook so badly she dropped the rifle. Then she was on her knees, vomiting into the sink, her body rejecting the violence even as her mind tried to process it. She'd killed someone. Actually killed someone. A man who probably had a mother somewhere. Maybe siblings. Maybe a girl who loved him. And Eleanor had ended him. Footsteps thundered down the hallway. Graham burst into the kitchen, gun raised, then stopped when he saw the scene. Jack's body. The blood. Eleanor shaking beside the sink. He crossed to her in 3 strides, pulled her into his arms. She wanted to resist, wanted to stand on her own, but her legs wouldn't support her. So she clung to him and shook and tried not to look at the corpse bleeding out on Maggie's clean floor. "You're alive. That's what matters." Graham's voice was firm, grounding. "You did what you had to do." "I killed him." "Yes. And if you hadn't, he would have killed you." Graham pulled back, forced her to look at him. "Listen to me, Eleanor. There's no shame in surviving. There's no shame in protecting yourself. You are not weak. You are not a murderer. You are a woman who refused to be a victim. Remember that." Eleanor nodded, unable to speak. Graham helped her stand, retrieved the Winchester, checked her arm where Jack's knife had cut her. The wound was shallow, would heal clean, but the scar would remain. Another mark to match the one on her wrist. "Can you walk?" "Yes." "Then we need to move. The fire's contained, but Vincent knows we're fighting back now. Things are about to get worse." They made their way back to the foyer. The fire had been extinguished, but smoke damage blackened the walls and ceiling. Vincent stood in the center of the ruined space, his 3 remaining men flanking him. His smile was gone now, replaced by cold rage. "You killed Jack." "He attacked Eleanor," Graham said, his voice steady. "That's on you, Vincent. You brought him here. You set him loose. Whatever happens now, you're responsible." "Responsible?" Vincent laughed, a brittle sound with no humor in it. "Do you know what's funny, Graham? I didn't come here to kill you. I came here to negotiate. Really negotiate. I thought maybe after 8 years we could find some common ground, some way to be brothers again. Then why bring the men? Why cut the telegraph lines? Insurance. Because I know you, little brother. I know you'd never deal with me fairly unless you had no choice." Vincent's voice turned bitter. "But then you had to be Graham Blackwood, protector of the weak, had to turn this woman into a killer, had to prove that everyone around you gets destroyed eventually. That's not what happened. Isn't it? Look at her." Vincent pointed at Eleanor, who stood behind Graham, the Winchester still in her hands. "She's traumatized. She'll never be the same. Just like Catherine was never the same after you married her. Just like I was never the same after you sent me to prison. You destroy everything you touch, and you're too blind to see it." The words hit harder than any physical blow. Eleanor saw Graham flinch, saw doubt flicker across his face. Vincent saw it too and pressed his advantage. "Sign over the company, let me go, and maybe, just maybe, I'll let you keep this one alive. Keep your little mountain paradise. Exile yourself here forever if that's what you want. But give me what's mine, and I'll disappear." For a moment Eleanor thought Graham might actually do it, might actually sacrifice everything he'd built to save her. But then she remembered something. Vincent was lying. He'd already shown his hand by setting the fire, by letting his men run wild. If Graham signed, Vincent would kill them all anyway just to make sure there were no witnesses. "No," Eleanor said, stepping out from behind Graham. "He's lying. Even if you sign, he'll kill us." Vincent's eyes narrowed. "Smart girl, but not smart enough. You've already killed one of my men. Do you really think you can kill 3 more? Kill me? You're a school teacher playing at being tough, and sooner or later you're going to break." Eleanor raised the Winchester, pointed it at Vincent's chest. Her hands didn't shake this time. "Try me." For a long moment the foyer was silent, except for the crackle of dying embers and the howl of wind outside. Then Vincent smiled again, that same cold, predatory smile. "I think I will." He turned and walked toward the door, his 3 men following, but at the threshold he stopped, looked back. "The storm's breaking. 3 days, maybe 4, and the pass will be clear enough to travel. I'll wait that long. Then I'm taking what's mine one way or another. You can give it to me, or I can take it from your corpse. Your choice, brother." They left, disappearing into the darkness beyond the house. Graham immediately moved to secure the door, barricading it with furniture. "They'll be back," he said. "Probably tonight. They'll try to overwhelm us, kill us quickly before we can organize a defense. Then we don't wait for them to attack. We attack first." Graham turned surprise clear on his face. "You want to go after them?" "Eleanor, there are 4 of them. Well, 3 now, but still." "I know. That's why we need an advantage." Eleanor's mind raced, putting together pieces of a plan. "They're in the bunkhouse, right, drunk probably, celebrating because they think they've won. We surprise them. You take the front, I'll take the back. We end this tonight." "You're talking about an execution. I'm talking about survival." Eleanor met his eyes, saw her own fear and determination reflected there. "They came here to kill us, Graham. They set fire to your house with us inside. This isn't murder, it's self-defense." Graham studied her for a long moment. Finally he nodded. "All right, but we do this smart. We get Maggie and Ruth somewhere safe first. Then we plan every detail, because if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right." They spent the next hour preparing. Maggie and Ruth were sent to the wine cellar with instructions to barricade the door and not open it for anyone but Graham or Eleanor. Graham loaded every gun in the house, laid out ammunition, checked and rechecked their weapons. Eleanor changed into dark clothes, bound her bleeding arm with bandages, and tried to quiet the voice in her head that screamed she wasn't a killer, wasn't capable of what they were about to do. But she'd already killed once tonight. The second time would be easier. The third easier still. That's what scared her most. Not that she couldn't do it, but that she could. That some part of her, the part that came from Morning Star, the part that had watched her mother die and vowed never to be helpless again, was eager for this. Midnight, the appointed hour. Graham and Eleanor moved through the darkness like ghosts' weapons, ready hearts pounding. The bunkhouse sat 200 yards from the main house, a squat structure that normally housed seasonal workers. Light showed through the cracks in the shutters, voices within rough and loud men drinking away their fears. Graham positioned Eleanor at the back door, handed her his spare revolver in addition to the Winchester. "Wait for my signal. When you hear the front door open, you come in shooting. Don't hesitate. Don't think. Just shoot." "What's the signal?" He almost smiled. "You'll know." Graham moved around to the front of the bunkhouse. Eleanor waited in the darkness, every sense heightened, every nerve singing with adrenaline. Inside, she could hear Vincent's voice giving orders, making plans. They were discussing the best way to kill Graham, whether to make it quick or slow, whether to keep Eleanor alive for a while or kill her immediately. Monsters. They were all monsters, and Eleanor was about to become one too. The front door exploded inward. Graham's voice, commanding and cold, cut through the night. "Nobody move!" Chaos erupted, men shouting, furniture crashing. Eleanor counted to 3, then kicked in the back door and entered hell. The bunkhouse was a single large room, 4 bunks, a table with cards and whiskey bottles, and 3 men scrambling for their weapons. Vincent near the far wall, Cole by the front door, and Bran reaching for a rifle propped against his bunk. Eleanor shot Bran first, center mass just like Maggie had taught her. He went down with a scream, clutching his stomach. Cole spun toward her, pistol in hand. She dove behind a bunk as his shot splintered the wood above her head. Graham fired twice. Cole fell, a red flower blooming on his chest. Hayes, the last gunman, threw himself out a window glass, shattering blood trailing behind him as he fled into the darkness. That left Vincent. He stood against the far wall, no weapon visible, hands raised in a gesture of surrender. But his eyes were full of hate. "Looks like you win, brother." "It didn't have to be this way." Graham kept his gun trained on Vincent's chest. "You could have let it go, could have built a new life." "Let it go." Vincent's laugh was hollow. "You took everything from me, my freedom, my future, the woman I loved. And you want me to let it go?" "Catherine never loved you. She told me herself. You were a friend, nothing more." The words were cruel, calculated to hurt, and they worked. Something broke behind Vincent's eyes. He lunged forward, reaching for a knife hidden in his belt. Graham fired. Once, twice. Vincent stumbled, hit the wall, slid down slowly. Blood spread across his expensive shirt, dark and fatal. He looked down at the wound, almost surprised, then up at his brother. "I'm sorry," Graham whispered. "I'm sorry for everything." Vincent tried to speak, coughed blood instead. His hand scrabbled at his chest, pulled out something from inside his shirt. A photograph, old and worn. He held it out to Graham with shaking fingers. Graham took it. In the dim light, Eleanor could see 3 people, 2 men and a woman. Graham, Vincent, and a beautiful woman with dark hair and kind eyes. Catherine. They all looked so young, so happy. "She loved us both." Vincent managed, his voice weak and wet. Before Father made her choose." "Vincent, hold on. Let me get help." "No, I'm done holding on." Vincent's eyes found Eleanor standing in the shadows with the Winchester still in her hands. "Take care of him. He'll destroy himself if someone doesn't stop him." Then his eyes closed, and Vincent Blackwood died in the bunkhouse of the empire he'd helped build and been denied, surrounded by the blood of the men who'd tried to help him take his revenge. Eleanor lowered her weapon, her entire body trembling. She'd killed 2 men tonight, wounded a 3rd, and watched a 4th die. The school teacher from Dust Ridge was gone forever. In her place stood someone harder, colder, someone who knew what it took to survive. Graham knelt beside his brother's body, shoulders shaking. Eleanor wanted to go to him to offer comfort, but she knew this grief was his to bear alone. This was the price of the choices he'd made 5 years ago, 10 years ago, a lifetime ago. The past had finally caught up to Graham Blackwood, and it had extracted its pound of flesh. They buried Vincent the next morning in the family plot behind the house next to Catherine and the infant son who'd never lived long enough to have a name. Graham said no words, just stood in the snow as Maggie and Eleanor shoveled dirt over his brother's grave. Hayes, the wounded gunman, had fled into the mountains. They found his body 3 days later, frozen to death, still trying to reach the pass that would have been his salvation. The storm broke on the 7th day. The pass opened, and with it came the law. A U.S. Marshal and 6 deputies rode into the valley, summoned by a telegraph that had never been sent. Apparently, word of Vincent's prison break had spread fast, and a warrant for his arrest had been issued across 3 territories. The marshal had been tracking him for weeks and finally traced him here. Graham told the story simply. His brother had come seeking revenge, had brought killers, had set fire to the house with people inside. Eleanor and Graham had defended themselves. The bodies told the story well enough. The burned foyer, the blood in the kitchen, the bunkhouse turned abattoir. The marshal, a weathered man named Carson, took statements from everyone. Maggie confirmed the story. Ruth confirmed the story. Even Thomas, still recovering from his broken ribs, confirmed the story. But Carson's eyes lingered on Eleanor, on the bandage around her arm, on the hardness in her gaze that hadn't been there before. "You killed 2 men yourself, Miss Hartwell." "I did. They were trying to kill me. I had no choice." "And you, Mr. Blackwood, your brother. That must have been difficult." Graham's face could have been carved from stone. "He made his choices. I made mine. We all have to live with consequences." Carson studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll put in my report that it was self-defense, justified shooting. But there'll be questions back in Denver. The Blackwood Corporation has enemies. They'll want to make sure this was legitimate and not some power play. Let them ask their questions. I have nothing to hide." But that wasn't quite true, and Eleanor knew it. Graham was hiding plenty. The guilt over Vincent's imprisonment, the choices that had led to Catherine's death, the years of self-imposed exile, all of it was hidden beneath that stone face, festering like an infected wound. The marshal and his men stayed 2 days documenting everything, taking photographs of the scene, collecting evidence. Then they left, taking the bodies with them for proper burial in Denver, and Eleanor and Graham were alone again in the mansion on the mountain, surrounded by the aftermath of violence, trying to figure out what came next. Graham retreated into himself. He spent his days in his office sending telegrams, managing his empire from a distance. He spoke to Eleanor only when necessary, polite but distant, as if she were a stranger who'd wandered into his house by accident. Eleanor understood. She'd seen him at his lowest, watched him kill his own brother, witnessed the complete destruction of whatever hope he'd harbored about redemption. He couldn't look at her without remembering that night, couldn't be near her without feeling the weight of all his failures. So she gave him space, gave him time, and hoped that eventually the man who'd saved her in Dust Ridge might find his way back to himself. A month passed, then 2. Spring came slowly to the high valley, melting snow, revealing the damage from the fire from the fighting. The house could be repaired. Graham had the money and the means, but some damage went deeper than walls and floors. In early April, a letter arrived. An official summons from the territorial court in Denver. The district attorney wanted to ask Graham questions about his business practices, about allegations of sabotage and murder dating back to 1870. About whether Vincent had been right all along, whether Graham had used his brother as a scapegoat. The past, it seemed, was not done with Graham Blackwood yet. He showed Eleanor the letter one evening at dinner. "I have to go. Have to face this. If I don't, they'll come here with warrants and drag me back in chains. Then I'm coming with you. No, it's too dangerous. There are people in Denver who would love to see me destroyed. Having you there would just give them leverage. I'm not asking permission, Graham. I'm telling you. We face this together, or you don't go at all." He looked at her, then really looked at her for the first time in weeks. "Why, after everything I've put you through, after everything you've had to do because of me, why would you stand with me?" Eleanor took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "Because you were right. We are survivors, both of us. We've both lost people we loved. We've both made terrible choices. But we're still here, still fighting. And I'm not going to let you face your demons alone when you didn't let me face mine alone." Something shifted in Graham's expression. The walls didn't come down completely, but they cracked, just a little, enough to let in a sliver of light. "All right, we'll go together. But Eleanor, if things go bad, if they arrest me, you get on the first train out of Denver and don't look back. Promise me." "I can't promise that." "Then promise me you'll survive. Whatever happens. Promise me that." Eleanor reached across the table, took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, holding on like a drowning man grabbing a lifeline. "I promise." They traveled to Denver the following week, taking the train from the nearest station 20 miles away. The journey took 3 days, and Eleanor spent most of it watching Graham wrestle with his thoughts, his fears, his guilt. The trial, when it finally began, was a spectacle. The courtroom packed with journalists, businessmen, curiosity seekers. Graham Blackwood, the mysterious railroad king, finally dragged into the light. The district attorney was a thin man named Harrison, who clearly relished the attention. He laid out his case with dramatic flair. Vincent Blackwood had been the scapegoat for his brother's crimes. Graham had ordered the sabotage of the competing railroad line. 12 men had died. Vincent had gone to prison while Graham built an empire on blood money. Graham's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Stone, countered with evidence of Vincent's instability, his gambling, his violence. She brought witnesses who testified to Vincent's threats against Graham, his obsession with Catherine, his barely controlled rage. And then Eleanor took the stand. She told her story simply. The dead in Dust Ridge, Graham's rescue, the months in the valley, Vincent's arrival with his hired killers, the siege, the fire, the final confrontation in the bunkhouse. "And you killed 2 men yourself?" Harrison asked, his tone making it sound like an accusation. "I did. One was about to rape me. The other was shooting at me. I defended myself." "Or perhaps you were defending Mr. Blackwood's secrets, helping him cover up his crimes." Eleanor met the district attorney's eyes without flinching. "I was defending my life. If that's a crime in your eyes, then I suppose I'm guilty." The courtroom murmured. Harrison tried to press harder to paint Eleanor as Graham's accomplice, his pawn. But she wouldn't bend, wouldn't break. Every question she answered with calm certainty. Finally, Graham himself took the stand. Harrison attacked immediately, bringing up Catherine's death, Vincent's imprisonment, the sabotage from 1870. "Did you order your brother to destroy the competing line?" "Yes." The admission sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Harrison smiled, smelling victory. "And did you then allow him to take sole responsibility when the law came calling?" "Yes." Graham's voice was steady, unflinching. "I made choices that destroyed my brother's life. I am guilty of that. But I did not kill those 12 men. Vincent's plan was to delay the line, not destroy it. Someone else, someone we never identified, sabotaged the sabotage, turned a simple blockage into a tragedy. How convenient. An unknown conspirator to absolve you of guilt. I'm not asking to be absolved." Graham leaned forward, and in that moment Eleanor saw the man who'd built an empire, who commanded respect and fear in equal measure. "I'm asking for justice, not for me, for Vincent. He was troubled, violent, dangerous, but he was also my brother, and I failed him. I'm prepared to accept consequences for that failure, but I won't accept being blamed for deaths I didn't cause." The trial lasted 2 weeks. Witnesses came and went. Evidence was presented and disputed. The newspapers ran daily stories, each more sensational than the last. And through it all, Eleanor sat in the gallery, a quiet presence that Graham could look to when the questioning became too intense. The verdict, when it came, was mixed. Graham was found not guilty of the murders. The evidence was too circumstantial, too dependent on Vincent's word against his. But he was found guilty of reckless endangerment for ordering the original sabotage. His sentence was 5 years of probation and a fine of $500,000. Additionally, the judge ordered Graham to establish a charitable fund in Vincent's name to be used for education and social services in the mining territories. 30% of the Blackwood Corporation's annual profits would go into this fund. It was a victory of sorts. Graham would keep his freedom, keep his company. But he would also pay for his crimes year after year in perpetuity. As they left the courthouse, Eleanor took Graham's arm. He looked down at her, something like wonder in his eyes. "You stayed. Through all of that. You stayed. I told you I would. I don't deserve you. Probably not. But you're stuck with me anyway." They returned to the valley in late spring when the wildflowers were just beginning to bloom. The house had been repaired in their absence. The fire damage erased new furniture, replacing what had been destroyed. It looked the same, but everything was different. Graham was different. The walls he'd built around himself had come down, not all at once, but slowly, carefully. He smiled more, laughed occasionally, started taking walks with Eleanor through the valley, pointing out plants and animals, teaching her the names of the peaks that surrounded them. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Graham pulled an envelope from his pocket. I had this drawn up by my lawyer before the trial, in case I went to prison." He handed it to Eleanor. "Open it." Inside was a legal document. Eleanor read through the complex language, her eyes widening as she understood what she was seeing. A transfer of ownership. 50% of everything Graham owned. The house, the land, the corporation. All of it split equally between them. "Graham, I can't accept this." "Yes, you can. We're partners, Eleanor, in every way that matters. This just makes it legal." Eleanor stared at the paper, at the fortune it represented. Enough money to never worry again. Enough power to change lives. But all she could think about was that platform in Dust Ridge and the terrified woman who'd stood there thinking her life was over. Slowly, deliberately, Eleanor tore the document in half, then in half again. Then again, reducing it to confetti that scattered in the evening breeze. Graham stared at her, shocked. "What are you doing? I don't need a piece of paper to know my worth, and you don't need guilt to keep me here." Eleanor took his hand, laced her fingers through his. "I'm here because I choose to be, because we saved each other, because somehow against all odds we found something worth keeping in this mess we've made." Graham pulled her close, wrapped his arms around her, buried his face in her hair. And for the first time since Catherine died, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he deserved a second chance. They married that summer, a quiet ceremony with only Maggie, Ruth, and Thomas in attendance. No grand celebration, no speeches. Just two people who'd survived hell choosing to build something better. The years that followed were peaceful, productive. Graham ran his empire with Eleanor at his side, no longer hiding in the mountains, but engaging with the world. The Vincent Blackwood Memorial Fund built schools, hospitals, libraries across the territories. It saved lives, changed lives. And Graham and Eleanor built a family. 2 children, a girl and a boy. Catherine Grace, named for Graham's first wife, who grew up strong and fierce and unafraid. And Thomas Vincent, named for the son Graham lost and the brother who sought redemption too late. The children grew up knowing the truth about Vincent, about the choices their parents had made, about the violence that had brought them together. They grew up understanding that sometimes good people make terrible choices, and that redemption is a road that never ends. And in 1915, when Samuel Blackwood sat in his grandfather's library asking about love and duty, Graham told him the story. All of it. The good and the bad. The blood and the hope. Because some stories need to be remembered, even the painful parts. Especially the painful parts. "So you see," Graham said, his 72-year-old voice still strong, still clear, "your mother is wrong. Marrying for money, for status, for what other people think is right, that's the coward's path. Marrying for love, even when it's difficult, even when it's dangerous, that takes real courage." Samuel nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. "And grandmother, where is she now?" Graham smiled, stood up, walked to the window. In the garden below, Eleanor worked among her roses, silver-haired now, but still moving with grace and purpose. Their grandchildren played nearby, laughing and chasing each other through the spring sunshine. She's where she's always been, with family, with the people she chose to love. He turned back to Samuel, his expression serious. "So here's what I'm telling you, boy. If you love that girl, if she makes you better than you are, if she sees who you really are and loves you anyway, then marry her. Don't let money or pride or fear stop you. Because at the end of your life, when you're old and tired and looking back, the only thing that matters is whether you chose love when you had the chance." Samuel stood cross to his grandfather, embraced him. "Thank you for telling me, for being honest. That's what family does. We tell each other the truth, even when it hurts." Later that night, after Samuel had gone to bed, Graham and Eleanor sat together in their room. She brushed out her silver hair while he watched from the bed, a nightly ritual 40 years in the making. "You told him," she said, not a question. "I did. Everything. Even Vincent. Especially Vincent. He deserves to know where he comes from, the good and the bad." Eleanor set down her brush, came to sit beside him on the bed. Her hand found his fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "Do you think we did the right thing all those years ago?" "I think we survived. I think we built something beautiful out of something broken. Is that enough?" "It's enough for me." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd walked through fire and come out the other side scarred but whole. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the scent of spring and new beginnings. And in that moment, in that room, Graham Blackwood finally allowed himself to believe what Eleanor had been trying to tell him for 37 years. He was forgiven. By her. By himself. By whatever God watched over broken people trying their best to be better. The mountain had taken much from him, but it had also given him everything that mattered. Eleanor, love, family, a second chance at the life he'd thought lost forever. And in the end, that was the only judgment that mattered. Montana, autumn 1915. The library. The fire had burned down to embers. Graham Blackwood fell silent, his story complete. Across from him, Samuel sat motionless, tears streaming down his young face. "Grandfather," Samuel whispered, "I had no idea. The things you went through, the things grandmother did." Graham reached across, placed a weathered hand on his grandson's knee. "That's why I told you, boy, so you'd understand. Love isn't pretty. It's not the fairy tales they write in books. It's blood and fear and choosing to stand beside someone even when everything's falling apart." Samuel wiped his eyes. "The girl I love, her name is Margaret. Her family is poor from the mining territory just like grandmother was." Graham smiled. "Is that so? Well, that's a good omen if I've ever heard one. Mother will be furious if I marry her." "Let her be furious. Your mother has never understood that some things are worth fighting for." Graham stood slowly, joints protesting with age. "Go to bed, Samuel. Think about what I've told you. And tomorrow, if you still love that girl, you go to her. You tell her the truth, and you ask her to stand with you no matter what comes." Samuel embraced his grandfather, then left the library. Graham remained staring into the dying fire, lost in memories of a winter 40 years past. The door opened softly. Eleanor entered, wrapped in a shawl, her silver hair loose around her shoulders. "You told him everything," she said, settling into the chair Samuel had vacated. "I did. Was that wrong?" "No." Eleanor reached for his hand. "It was necessary. He needs to know what real love looks like, not the sanitized version his mother prefers." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that comes only after decades of shared trials. Outside, an autumn wind rattled the windows, reminding them both of that winter long ago when their world had hung by a thread. "Do you ever regret it?" Graham asked suddenly. "Coming with me that day in Dust Ridge, all the blood, all the pain." Eleanor turned to him, her eyes still sharp despite her age. "Not for a single moment. You gave me a choice when I had none. You stood with me when I needed strength. And together we built something that will outlive us both." She gestured toward the door Samuel had left through. "That boy will marry his Margaret. They'll have children. Those children will tell our story to their children. And the Blackwood name will mean more than railroads and gold. It will mean courage. It will mean love." Graham pulled her close, kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Eleanor Hartwell Blackwood. From that first moment I saw you teaching those mining children right up to this very second. I have loved you without pause. And I love you, you stubborn, impossible man." She looked up at him, a mischievous smile on her lips. "Though I still say you should have shaved that beard sooner. You looked like a bear." He laughed, the sound filling the quiet library. "Come to bed, wife. We're too old to be sitting up telling ghost stories." It wasn't a ghost story. It was our story. The best ones always are. They left the library together, hands clasped, footsteps slow but steady. Behind them the fire died completely, leaving only warm ashes and the lingering scent of wood smoke. In the garden below, roses bloomed even in the autumn chill planted by Eleanor's hands 40 years ago. And in the family plot behind the house, 3 graves stood side by side, Catherine, Thomas, and Vincent, all at peace at last. The mountain held its secrets close. But this secret, This story of love born from desperation and forged in blood would be remembered, because some stories are worth telling, worth preserving, worth passing down through generations. And the story of Graham and Eleanor Blackwood was one of them.